What if we told you that one of the most charming indie rom-coms of the 90s was financed by cab-driving money, featured a director who cried when he first saw himself on screen, and was based on a real-life heartbreak with a music industry executive? From Harvey Weinstein's meddling to accidental celebrity cameos, Hav Plenty has more bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets than you'd expect from its $65 budget. Fact 1. Financed by taxi driving. Most independent filmmakers dream of finding investors or winning grants to fund their passion projects. But Christopher Scott Charrett took a much more hands-on approach to financing his romantic comedy, Hav Plenty. When traditional funding sources fell through, Charrett made the decision that would define both his work ethic and his film's authentic grassroots spirit. He became a New York City taxi driver to literally earn his movie one fare at a time. Driving through the bustling streets of Manhattan day after day, Charrett saved every dollar he could from his cab driving earnings, knowing that each tip and each ride was bringing him closer to making his dream film a reality. But even his dedication behind the wheel wasn't enough to cover the full production costs, so his mother, a physical therapist, made an incredible sacrifice that showed just how much she believed in her son's vision. She took out a third mortgage on her New York home, putting her own financial security on the line to help fund the movie. The combination of Charrett's taxi driving income and his mother's mortgage money gave the production a total budget of just $65,000, which was remarkably small even by 1997 independent film standards. To put this in perspective, another black romantic comedy released that same year, Love Jones, had an estimated budget of $10 million, making Hav Plenty a true shoestring operation by comparison. This grassroots financing approach meant that every single dollar had to count, and there was absolutely no room for waste or expensive mistakes during production. The financial pressure was so intense that Charrett later admitted he lived in constant fear that if the movie failed, his mother would lose her house, and he would have to abandon filmmaking entirely to find steady work. Fact 2. The Drew Dixon connection. While many romantic comedies draw inspiration from fictional scenarios, Hav Plenty was born from Christopher Scott Charrett's very real heartbreak over a woman who was making waves in the music industry. The entire film was based on Charrett's unrequited romance with Drew Dixon, a rising executive at Def Jam Recordings, who would go on to become one of the most influential figures in hip-hop and R&B music during the 1990s. Drew Dixon wasn't just any music industry professional when Charrett fell for her in 1994. She was a Stanford University graduate who had worked her way up to become an A&R executive at one of the most prestigious record labels in the world, where she was responsible for discovering and developing talent that would shape the sound of an entire generation. Her impressive career trajectory included working with some of the biggest names in music, including Method Man, Whitney Houston, and Lauryn Hill, making her a true powerhouse in an industry dominated by men. The relationship between Charrett and Dixon never developed beyond his one-sided feelings, but the emotional impact of that unrequited love was so profound that it inspired him to channel his experience into what would become his breakthrough film. Charrett has been remarkably open about the fact that the character of Haviland Savage, played by Chenua Maxwell, was directly inspired by Dixon, and that the weekend depicted in the movie was based on actual events from his real life. What makes this connection even more fascinating is that Dixon's career continued to flourish long after serving as Charrett's inspiration, as she went on to work at Arista Records, where she helped produce hit records for major artists, and eventually earned an MBA from Harvard Business School. Her influence on the music industry extended far beyond what Charrett could have imagined when he first fell for her, making the real-life inspiration behind Hav Plenty even more compelling than the fictional story itself. Fact 3. Last-minute leading man switch. Christopher Scott Charrett never intended to be the star of his own movie, and the circumstances that forced him into the leading role of Lee Plenty created one of the most stressful moments in the entire production process. Originally, Charrett had cast another actor to play the autobiographical character based on his own life experiences, but on the very eve of filming, disaster struck when his leading man made a decision that nearly derailed the entire project. The original actor, who was supposed to portray Lee Plenty, received an offer to work on a Spike Lee film, which in the 1990s was considered a tremendous opportunity that could launch any young actor's career. Faced with the choice between appearing in Charrett's ultra-low-budget independent film or working with one of the most acclaimed directors in cinema, the actor made what seemed like the obvious professional decision and walked away from Hav Plenty at the last possible moment. This sudden departure left Chero in an impossible situation, as he had already assembled his cast and crew, scheduled all the shooting locations, and was operating on such a tight budget that any delay would have been financially catastrophic. With no time to find and cast a replacement actor, Chero was forced to make the terrifying decision to step in front of the camera himself and play the character that was based on his own life story. The irony of this casting crisis was that Chero had written the role specifically based on his own personality and experiences, making him the most natural choice to play Hav Plenty, even though he had never intended to act in the film. However, this unexpected turn of events meant that a first-time director was now also taking on the demanding job of being the lead actor, which would create additional challenges throughout the filming process and contribute to some of the production's most memorable behind-the-scenes moments. Fact 4. No dailies disaster. One of the most nerve-wracking aspects of the Hav Plenty production was that Christopher Scott Cherrett had to direct and star in his own film while flying completely blind about how his performance actually looked on camera. The production's extremely tight budget meant they couldn't afford one of the most basic elements of professional filmmaking, daily footage review, also known as dailies, which allows directors and actors to see what they've shot each day and make adjustments if needed. In typical film productions, dailies are processed and viewed every evening so that the creative team can catch problems early, whether it's lighting issues, performance concerns, or technical difficulties that need to be addressed before moving on to the next scenes. This daily review process is considered so essential that even many low-budget films find ways to include it in their budgets, but Cherrett's $65,000 production simply couldn't afford the processing costs and screening time that dailies would have required. This meant that throughout the entire filming process, Chero was not only juggling the demanding responsibilities of directing every scene and managing the cast and crew, but he was also delivering what he hoped was a convincing lead performance without any visual feedback about how he appeared on screen. As someone who had never acted professionally before and was already nervous about stepping into the leading role at the last minute, this lack of visual confirmation created an almost unbearable level of uncertainty and anxiety. The situation became even more challenging because Chero was playing a character based on his own life, which meant he had to balance staying true to his authentic personality, while also creating a compelling cinematic performance, all without knowing whether his natural mannerisms and expressions were translating effectively to film. This blind approach to filmmaking meant that the first time Chero would see his own acting work would be months later during the editing process, creating a moment that would become one of the most emotional experiences of the entire production. Fact 5. The Dairy Queen meltdown. After months of uncertainty and anxiety about his performance, the moment Christopher Scott Cherrett finally saw himself on screen became one of the most emotionally devastating experiences of his entire filmmaking journey. When the editing process was complete and he could finally watch the footage he had shot without being able to review during production, Chero's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He completely broke down and started crying, convinced that his inexperience as an actor had ruined the entire project. The weight of everything that was at stake came crashing down on him in that moment, as he realized that his mother had put her home on the line with a third mortgage to help finance his dream, and now he was terrified that his amateur acting performance would make the film unsellable and cause his family to lose everything. The financial pressure that had been building throughout the entire production process suddenly felt crushing, and Chero found himself spiraling into a panic about the consequences of his artistic gamble. In his most vulnerable moment, Chero imagined the worst possible scenario for his future, telling himself that his mother was going to lose her house and that he would have to abandon his filmmaking dreams entirely to find steady employment. The specific job he pictured for himself was working at a Dairy Queen, but since there weren't any Dairy Queen locations in New York City, he convinced himself that he would have to move all the way to Iowa just to find work at the ice cream chain, which felt like the ultimate symbol of failure and defeat. This emotional breakdown reveals just how much pressure Chero was under as a first-time filmmaker who had risked everything on a project that seemed impossible to complete successfully. The fact that he had never seen his own performance until this moment made the experience even more intense, as months of worry and uncertainty about his acting abilities suddenly came to a head in one devastating viewing session. Fact 6. 4 months to millionaire. The transformation of Hav Plenty from a completely unknown independent film to a major studio acquisition happened with a speed that seemed almost impossible in the notoriously slow-moving world of Hollywood, the deal-making. In just 4 months, Christopher Scott Charrett went from screening his movie in a tiny New York screening room to shaking hands on a multi-million-dollar distribution deal with Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful executives in the film industry at that time. The journey began in May 1997 with what Charrett called his first cast and crew screening in a small screening room in New York City, where the film was shown to a handful of people who had worked on the production. This modest screening seemed like it might be the extent of the film's exposure, given that Charrett had no connections in the entertainment industry and no marketing budget to promote his $65,000 passion project to a wider audience. However, the film's momentum began building through a series of fortunate events and festival screenings that created increasing buzz throughout the summer of 1997. By September, Hav Plenty had made its way to the Toronto International Film Festival, which was considered one of the most important venues for independent films seeking major distribution deals. At the Toronto screening, Harvey Weinstein, who was then running Miramax Films and had a reputation for discovering breakthrough independent movies, saw the film and immediately recognized its commercial potential. Weinstein offered to purchase the distribution rights for an amount between $1.5 million and $2.3 million, which represented a return on investment that was almost unheard of for such a low-budget production. This handshake deal at Toronto meant that in the span of just 4 months, Charrett had gone from worrying about his mother losing her house to becoming a millionaire filmmaker with major studio backing. Fact 7. Accidental festival opening. Sometimes the most important moments in film history happen completely by accident, and Hav Plenty earned its breakthrough opportunity through one of the most random encounters imaginable in the entertainment industry. The film's journey to becoming the opening night selection at a major film festival began with nothing more than producer Robin Green being in the right place at the right time during what was supposed to be a small, private screening in New York City. In May 1997, Green was attending the first cast and crew screening of Hav Plenty in a small screening room in a New York building when she happened to run into two highly respected figures in black cinema while walking through the Plank lobby. Warrington Hudlin, who was a prominent producer and director known for films like House Party, and Bill Duke, the acclaimed actor and director behind movies like A Rage in Harlem, were both in the same building for completely unrelated business. Rather than simply exchanging pleasantries and moving on, Green made the spontaneous decision to invite both men upstairs to watch the film, even though they were complete strangers who had no prior knowledge of the project or any obligation to spend their time viewing an unknown independent movie. Both Hudlin and Duke agreed to the impromptu screening, and their reaction to Hav Plenty was immediately enthusiastic and supportive. Hudlin was so impressed by what he saw that he extended an invitation to Christopher Scott Charrett on the spot, asking him to participate in the inaugural year of the Acapulco Black Film Festival, which would later become known as the American Black Film Festival. Charrett accepted the invitation immediately, and just 1 month later, in June 1997, Hav Plenty had the honor of being the very first opening night film at the brand new festival, launching what would become one of the most important showcases for African-American cinema. Fact 8. Star-studded cameo confusion. One of the most unusual and confusing aspects of Hav Plenty comes in its final act, where the film takes a bizarre meta-turn that features some of the biggest names in entertainment appearing as alternate versions of the main characters in what can only be described as a movie within a movie sequence. This surreal ending shows Lee Plenty screening his debut film called True Love at a film festival, and audiences get to watch the fictional characters from the main story being portrayed by completely different actors who were major stars at the time. In this strange cinematic twist, viewers see Nia Long, who was already a well-established actress known for films like Boys and the Hood and Friday, playing the alternate version of Haviland Savage, the character originally portrayed by Chenoa Maxwell throughout the main story. Shamar Moore, who was gaining fame from his role on The Young and the Restless, appears as an alternate version of one of the male characters, while Mekhi Phifer, fresh off his breakthrough performance in Clockers, takes on another reimagined role. Perhaps most remarkably, the cameo cast includes Lauryn Hill, who at the time was still primarily known as a member of the Fugees and hadn't yet released her legendary solo album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Her appearance in this sequence captured her just before she would become one of the most celebrated artists of the late 1990s, making her cameo particularly valuable in hindsight. This meta-ending was actually part of the additional footage that was shot to satisfy studio demands for a happier conclusion to the film, and the surreal nature of watching established stars play alternate versions of characters we had just spent 90 minutes getting to know created a dreamlike quality that left many viewers scratching their heads about what they had just witnessed. Fact 9. Miramax's mandatory happy ending. After Harvey Weinstein and Miramax Films acquired the distribution rights to Hav Plenty, one of the first changes the studio demanded was something that would fundamentally alter the tone and meaning of Christopher Scott Sherritt's carefully crafted ending. Weinstein, who was known throughout Hollywood for his hands-on approach to the films his company distributed, insisted that the movie needed a happier and more optimistic conclusion than what Sherritt had originally created. The original ending of Hav Plenty was intentionally ambiguous, leaving audiences uncertain about whether Lee Plenty and Haviland Savage would actually end up together, which reflected the realistic and bittersweet nature of the real-life experience that had inspired the story. However, Weinstein felt that moviegoers would be more satisfied with a clearer resolution that suggested the romantic leads had found their way to each other, even if that wasn't necessarily what had happened in Sherritt's actual life. Rather than completely rewrite the ending, Sherritt and Weinstein reached a compromise that resulted in one of the most unusual and expensive additions to any low-budget film. They agreed to add a 1 year later epilogue sequence that would show a more upbeat conclusion while still leaving some room for interpretation about the character's ultimate fate. This additional sequence cost an extra $50,000 to produce, which was nearly the entire budget of the original film. What made this expensive addition even more bizarre was that the new ending featured a meta-narrative where Lee Plenty is shown screening his own film at a festival, complete with celebrity cameos playing alternate versions of the main characters. This surreal approach allowed Sherritt to satisfy the studio's demand for a happier ending while also creating a commentary on the filmmaking process itself, though many viewers found the result more confusing than satisfying. Fact 10. The Robin Lee future bestseller, one of the most remarkable career transformations among the Hav Plenty cast, belongs to Robin Lee, who played Lee Darling, the conflicted sister character who finds herself torn between her marriage and her attraction to Lee Plenty during that pivotal New Year's weekend. What makes Lee's trajectory so fascinating is that her small role in this 1997 independent film was actually her very first screen appearance, launching what would become a diverse career spanning both acting and writing. After her debut in Hav Plenty, Lee continued building her acting resume with appearances in films like National Security, Hitch, and later the 50 Shades sequels, but she was also quietly developing her skills as a writer throughout her acting career. Lee had been writing since childhood and continued to work on personal writing projects even as she pursued roles in Hollywood, though few people in the entertainment industry were aware of her literary aspirations. In 2017, 20 years after her film debut, Lee published her first novel, The Idea of You, which became an unexpected publishing phenomenon. The book told the story of a 39-year-old single mother who begins a romance with a 20-year-old member of a famous boy band, exploring themes of age gap relationships, female desire, and societal expectations in ways that resonated with readers around the world. The novel's success reached new heights in 2024 when it was adapted into a major motion picture starring Anne Hathaway and distributed by Amazon Prime Video. The film brought Lee's story to an even wider audience and established her as a successful author whose work could attract A-list talent and significant studio investment. This transformation from a small supporting role in an ultra-low-budget indie film to becoming the source material for a major Hollywood production represents one of the most impressive career evolutions connected to the Hav Plenty cast. Fact 11. Babyface's instant investment. The moment that transformed Hav Plenty from a small independent film into a project with serious industry backing happened when two of the most powerful figures in music and entertainment witnessed the film's premiere at the Acapulco Black Film Festival in June 1997. Kenneth "Babyface" Edmonds, who was one of the most successful R&B producers and songwriters of the 1990s, attended the screening along with his wife Tracy Edmonds, who was rapidly establishing herself as a formidable entertainment executive and producer. Babyface had already achieved legendary status in the music industry by this point, having written and produced hits for artists like Whitney Houston, Boyz II Men, and Toni Braxton, while Tracy Edmonds had just experienced her first major success as a film producer with Soul Food, which had become a surprise hit earlier that year. When this power couple saw Hav Plenty at the festival, their response was immediate and enthusiastic, recognizing both the film's commercial potential and its authentic portrayal of young black professionals. Without hesitation, the Edmonds offered to attach their names to the project and take responsibility for creating an entirely new soundtrack that would replace whatever music Christopher Scott Sherritt had originally planned to use. This was an extraordinary offer because Babyface's involvement meant that the film would suddenly have access to top-tier musical talent and production values that could rival any major studio release. The impact of this partnership was transformative for the film's profile, as having Babyface and Tracy Edmonds attached to the project instantly attracted the attention of distributors, media outlets, and other industry professionals who might have otherwise overlooked a $65,000 independent film. Their involvement turned Hav Plenty from an obscure indie movie into a project with serious commercial credibility, setting the stage for the major distribution deal that would follow just a few months later. Fact 12. Almost a year to edit. While most filmmakers expect post-production to be challenging, Christopher Scott Sherritt discovered that completing Hav Plenty would require almost as much time as it had taken to write and shoot the entire movie, due to financial constraints that turned the editing process into a nearly year-long struggle. After wrapping principal photography, Sherritt found himself in the frustrating position of having all the footage he needed to create his film, but lacking the money necessary to properly edit it and produce a screening print that could be shown to potential distributors. The $65,000 budget that had seemed barely adequate during filming proved to be completely exhausted by the time cameras stopped rolling, leaving Sherritt without the funds needed for the extensive post-production work that every film requires. Professional editing facilities, sound mixing, color correction, and the creation of screening prints all cost money that Sherritt simply didn't have, forcing him to find creative and time-consuming alternatives to complete his movie. This financial crisis meant that Sherritt had to approach the editing process in a much more gradual and piecemeal way than he had originally planned, working on the film whenever he could afford to rent editing equipment or find someone willing to help him with technical aspects of post-production. The process became even more complicated because he was editing the film himself while also trying to figure out how all the pieces would fit together, since he hadn't been able to review daily footage during the shooting process. The nearly year-long editing marathon finally concluded in May 1997, when Sherritt was able to complete his first screening print and hold the cast and crew screening that would launch the film's remarkable journey to major studio distribution. This extended post-production period meant that almost 2 full years had passed between the start of filming and the moment when Hav Plenty was finally ready to be seen by audiences. Fact 13. The crack addict song joke. One of the most outrageous and memorable comedic elements in Hav Plenty revolves around a fictional R&B song that Christopher Scott Sherritt created specifically to highlight the sometimes ridiculous nature of romantic ballads in the music industry during the 1990s. The song, titled Crack Addict, appears on the album of Michael Simmons, the character played by Hill Harper, who serves as Haviland's boyfriend and represents the kind of smooth-talking recording artist who was popular at the time. The joke begins when Lee Plenty discovers Michael's CD and starts reading through the track listings, which include typical R&B song titles like Love 40, Love Be Down, and Getting on Love, but then suddenly includes the completely unexpected Crack Addict among the romantic ballads. When Lee questions what this song could possibly be about, Caroline Gooden, played by Tammy Catherine Jones, suggests that he should check the lyrics to understand the song's meaning. What makes this gag so brilliant is that the lyrics reveal the song to be a double entendre that uses drug addiction terminology to describe romantic obsession, with the singer claiming to be addicted to a woman's physical attributes, while insisting that he's not talking about actual drugs. The absurdity of this concept serves as Sherritt's satirical commentary on how some R&B songs of that era would use increasingly elaborate metaphors to describe desire and attraction. This running joke works on multiple levels within the film, as it not only provides comic relief, but also serves to characterize Michael as someone who takes himself very seriously as an artist, while creating music that is ultimately shallow and ridiculous. The Crack Addict song has become one of the most quoted and remembered elements of the film among fans, representing Sherritt's sharp sense of humor and his ability to poke fun at the cultural trends of the time. Fact 14. Washington, D.C. location mystery. While Hav Plenty is clearly set in Washington, D.C., and the characters frequently reference the nation's capital throughout the film, eagle-eyed viewers who are familiar with the area have noticed that many of the actual filming locations were shot across the border in Maryland, creating a geographic mystery that has puzzled local fans for decades. This discrepancy between the film's stated setting and its actual shooting locations reflects the practical challenges that Christopher Scott Sherritt faced while working with his extremely limited budget. One of the most obvious clues that sharp-eyed viewers have spotted involves the public transportation that appears in various scenes throughout the movie, specifically the old WMATA buses that can be seen in the background of several shots. While WMATA does operate in both Washington, D.C. and the surrounding Maryland suburbs, the specific bus models and route configurations visible in the film suggest that these scenes were filmed in Maryland rather than within the District of Columbia itself. Perhaps the most precise geographic identification that fans have made involves a particular street corner that appears in one scene, which local viewers have pinpointed as being located in Bethesda, Maryland, specifically at the intersection of Commerce and Old Georgetown Road. This location is clearly outside of Washington, D.C. proper, confirming that at least some of the filming took place in the wealthy Maryland suburb rather than in the urban setting that the story suggests. These location inconsistencies have become something of a treasure hunt for devoted fans of the film, who continue to identify and discuss the various Maryland locations that were used to represent Washington, D.C. in the movie. The fact that these geographic details are still being discovered and shared among viewers more than 25 years after the film's release demonstrates both the lasting appeal of Hav Plenty and the keen attention to detail that its most dedicated fans bring to repeated viewings. Fact 15. Roger Ebert's brutal honesty. The critical reception of Hav Plenty created a fascinating divide in the film criticism world, with most reviewers embracing Christopher Scott Sherritt's authentic storytelling and charming debut performance, but one of the most influential critics in America delivered a much harsher assessment that highlighted the tensions between independent filmmaking and traditional Hollywood standards. Roger Ebert, the Pulitzer Prize-winning film critic whose reviews could make or break movies at the box office, took a notably different stance from his colleagues when he evaluated the film. While critics from major publications like the New York Times, Variety, Entertainment Weekly, and The Hollywood Reporter praised the film's fresh perspective, witty dialogue, and Sherritt's confident directorial debut, Ebert was far less impressed with the technical aspects and overall execution of the project. In his review, Ebert described Hav Plenty as basically an amateur movie, acknowledging that it had some positive qualities but emphasizing what he saw as the clear limitations that came with Sherritt's inexperience as a filmmaker. Ebert's critique was particularly notable because he specifically mentioned that the film had some of the good things and many of the bad that go along with first-time efforts, suggesting that while he recognized Sherritt's potential and the film's charm, he felt that the technical shortcomings and rough edges were too significant to overlook. This assessment stood in stark contrast to reviews from critics who celebrated the film's raw authenticity and saw its low-budget aesthetic as part of its appeal rather than a weakness. This split in critical opinion perfectly captured the broader cultural moment in late 1990s cinema, when independent films were gaining unprecedented mainstream attention, and critics were debating whether technical polish should be valued over authentic storytelling and fresh voices. Ebert's honest but harsh assessment represented the traditional critical establishment, while other reviewers championed the emerging independent film movement that prioritized originality and personal vision over production values.